WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into the holiday week. We are putting a hiatus on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour so that I can eat ham and kielbasa and sauerkraut and loser pie and whatever it is that we eat. It's all brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. Sometimes we let ourselves play with an extra point, and sometimes we go for two. Luke Jones joins us now in the aftermath of what was a disappointing loss, a unique game in so many ways with a backup quarterback and a Hall of Famer on the other side and a chance to win. And Joe Buck and Troy Aikman are there. Aaron Andrews is there. You and I were there. So much will be made about going for two or the decision to go for two and then the play call on the backside of that. It was really kind of a remarkable Herculean effort that they were ever in a position to have such a decision to begin with, right?
Yeah, I mean, going into Sunday's game, if you asked me on Thursday, I wasn't feeling good about it. And then Chuck Clark tests positive for COVID-19. And you lose Chris Westry on Saturday. You lose Sammy Watkins on Saturday night. You lose Jimmy Smith on Sunday morning. And oh, yeah, they have how many guys on injured reserve? And, on top of all that, your former league MVP at quarterback isn't playing. So you look at all that, you're going up against a team that's number one in the NFC right now. Although certainly I didn't view Green Bay as invincible. I wasn't giving the Ravens much of a chance. I thought they'd compete. I thought they'd fight hard, even from the end of the practice week until Sunday morning. And you're really wondering, I mean, how are these guys going to do this? I mean, let's think about this, Nestor. How many Ravens fans honestly knew who Robert Jackson even was going into Sunday's game? And yet this guy's starting at corner once Tavon Young goes down and is out with the concussion. Now, he gives up a couple touchdowns. Yeah, he was on the practice squad and was just signed a couple weeks ago. But you just look at all the guys that were down. You look at the fact they're going up against a Green Bay team that's had its injuries, but certainly in a much better state of health than the Ravens are. I think it is kind of remarkable. And look, you and I are not types that are just going to sit here and talk about moral victories for the next couple hours as we rehash this. But at the same time, you do have to recognize where they are from a roster standpoint, from a health standpoint. And we can nitpick, and we'll be talking about 2-point conversions for the third straight week now. And that's fine. And John Harbaugh understands that. He has the conviction to step out and do something that's not even always about analytics. I mean, these are 50-50 propositions at the end of the game. We'll get into that, and I'll give you my thoughts on that as we get into that decision. But I mean, just the conviction, the resolve that they've played with. I think it's important to recognize. To me, this is the end of the line in terms of moral victories. You don't have any more space for that. I mean, this was an NFC game. Okay, you beat Cincinnati next week. You're back in first place, and you're back to controlling your path. But the margin for error is pretty much gone at this point. But at the same time, this team's played close games all year. I said it how many different times when they were 5 or 6-1 in one-score games. I said at some point in time, this is probably going to start leveling out if they don't play better. Well, it hasn't even been so much about that they're playing worse necessarily, but they've continued to lose players. So it really is remarkable that this was a game. And again, we can get into certain decisions, certain plays, certain penalty calls, such as the one pass interference that preceded a Green Bay touchdown pass. But you do have to be really impressed with where this team is at this point in time. And again, they've lost 3 in a row. I'm not going to shy away from that either, but I'm also going to be realistic in looking at where this team is. And I think John Harbaugh's coaching probably, if you really think about it, pulls back the curtain a little bit. John probably knows, as much as this team fights like hell, it's not very good at this point just because of the attrition, getting into other things like Lamar Jackson's play, et cetera. And I think it also reflects the culture that John Harbaugh can make a decision like he did at the end, go for 2. It's unsuccessful. And yet Mark Andrews, and maybe it helps that Mark Andrews was targeted on the 2-point conversion, but he said that was the decision. And anyone that's second guessing that is wrong. So You're talking about one of your leaders right there, not just saying, hey, this could go either way, or I could see some different decisions, but John's the coach. He made the decision. He showed so much conviction in supporting the coach. It reflects the culture. So I think John Harbaugh with some of these coaching decisions is kind of reflecting that this is a team that, despite the fact they're fighting, they've lost 3 in a row. They're barely holding on at this point. They're so banged up. They're so injured. Now you throw COVID positive tests into the mix. And again, the culture to have the conviction to make these kind of decisions. And even when it doesn't work out, you have players buying in and certainly not giving any indication that they're unhappy with those late game decisions. So I think it speaks a lot to the organization where they are in the present, which isn't in a great spot because of all the challenges we mentioned, but it also speaks to the big picture, which is the culture that they have built and the buy-in that they're continuing to get, where they've got guys on the practice squad going out and playing meaningful snaps, and yet they somehow still manage to compete and have a chance at the end against the number 1 seed in the NFC. It's pretty remarkable.
Luca, you and I'll get into the analytics but on the first drive, when you don't get points and you just say 3's not good enough for us, we have to get 6s, we have to get 7s, we have to get 8s in some cases, that 3's not good enough there when you're there, when through the history of football, 3 might have been good enough, and at the end it may have gotten you points. Look, the Chargers had a whole story the other night as well that they could go through in a division game where, in the end, when you did the math, the hard math, 1s and 2s, 1s start to add up too. When you don't make 2s, you start to cancel out the 1s. And for the Ravens and the way they play, I'm with you. They have a buy-in. They have a buy-in from you, right? You will always make the case that they're making the right decision because they're making an analytics decision that's a 50-50 decision. And in this specific case, where they go for it, and again, it speaks to attrition. It speaks to how he feels about his defense, how he feels about his odds of winning the game in an overtime or even in regulation, right? When it comes to specifically Sunday's game against the Packers. Why you go for 2 there and you try to end the football game with 2 yards. That you're willing to say it's all or nothing, and it literally is the riverboat. Like, we're not going to play for overtime. We have the best kicker in the history of the sport, and you and I went through that last week, which is not everybody can say that. Not everybody can say my Mason Crosby is automatic every time on an extra point, that we're really going to go to overtime, because it's not as automatic as it used to be. Now, that being said, the reality not of analytics or what the book in Vegas says about blackjack and whether you hit or stick on a soft 17, right? I'm talking about the real situation and the gut that Harbaugh talked about in the postgame when I pressed him, we pressed him on it, that putting that defense back out there against Aaron Rodgers, they were going to lose. Like that there was a larger percentage of losing that way than mounting a third drive at the end. And I think you would make a case that the Packers special teams kind of stink, which is really what set up the touchdown, that they can't punt the ball beyond the 50-yard line, right, no matter where they are. I have no problem with the decision, and this is where I'll get sideways. I thought the play call sucked. I mean, and it's not because it didn't work. It's just I'm not throwing the ball there. I'm not rolling out with one option where everybody in the stadium knows I want to throw the ball to 89. That's it.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a couple things here, and we'll get to the analytics part in a second, because to be totally honest, the end of game 2-point conversion is actually a little more of a 50-50 proposition. Even if you look at it from analytics people, they would actually say you go for 2 on the previous touchdown. But we'll get to that, because you bring up the play call, and I'm in agreement with you. I didn't like the play call. For one thing, I think you mentioned Mark Andrews. I mean, my God, he had such an amazing football game. 10 catches, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns. First tight end in Ravens history to go over 1,000 yards, which there haven't been many 1,000-yard seasons from wide receivers in the history of this franchise, Nestor. So it really speaks to, and we talked a little bit about this last week. Mark Andrews is not just a product of mojo with Lamar Jackson. He's a premier top 2 or 3 tight end in this league right now. He is playing right there with Travis Kelce, George Kittle. I mean, we can debate, and those guys have done it a little bit longer. So
Gronkowski's been doing a little while too.
Well, and Gronkowski has the legacy, right? I mean, he's already a Hall of Famer, and he's doing things for Tampa Bay
when he's chasing him. To me,
sure. Well, yeah, in a big picture sense, I mean, but the play call, I'm in agreement with you. I didn't like it. I do think, as well as Tyler Huntley played, I'm sure we'll get into talking about him and Lamar and where he is and what that means for next week. Not that there's a quarterback controversy in the big picture sense, but you do have to look at how Huntley's played, how Lamar has not played very well, how he's not healthy. That's going to be a discussion throughout the week. Might be the rest of the season. Who knows, depending on the ankle. But I think you do look at Tyler Huntley's second half, 13 of 18. Okay, that sounds good. Only had 78 yards. I mean, he was not pushing the ball down the field. He did it a little more early in the game, but it seemed like Green Bay was really dead set. And we've seen teams do this with Lamar at quarterback, and teams trying to take away the big plays, but they weren't pushing the ball down the field a whole lot. But what we were seeing was he was running. He was having success with his legs. I would have loved to have seen something there to give him a chance to make a play with his legs. I mean, when it's that quick rollout to the right, there's just not a whole. I mean, there's so many defenders in that space.
You run out of real estate. I mean, to me, it's a geometric issue, right, that I need more real estate, not less. That you really play into the defense's hands when you cut off half the field that way. I didn't like the play at all.
I almost would have liked a quarterback draw. And look, if they shoot the gap and they do something cover zero related, and we know teams have done that to the Ravens a ton, they might blow it up. And it might be, not only does he not get it, it might be a 5-yard loss. But I would have liked that. That said, when you do look at the situation, this one to me was more questionable as far as just looking at it pragmatically, whether they should have gone or not, than last week, which that was just, they needed a 2-point conversion one way or the other. They tried it first and they didn't get it, and that put them behind the 8 ball. Week before that, we know they had lost Marlon Humphrey. But you made the point with Aaron Rodgers going into overtime. And look, this defense at the very end of the game, they came up big. Now, you can debate after they went for the 4th down, put Green Bay on a short field. Maybe they got a little lucky. Rodgers airmails a wide open receiver on 3rd down, and they have to settle for the field goal. But then they got the 3 and out after the touchdown. That almost reminds me of, now you are starting to talk about odds. Okay, they did get a stop. That's awesome. It gave you a chance right there because you got the ball back and you had time. I mean, one thing that Green Bay did, not only did they move down the field and score, and the Ravens were having struggling to stop them, they were very methodical. They possessed the ball as much as early on in the game the Ravens possessed the ball. Green Bay was really able to sustain drives. So they're just kind of steadily moving down the field, and the Ravens didn't offer much resistance. And some of the 3rd downs, they were able to convert. But you do look at that, and you see them get that stop, and that's where you do look at this and say, all right, I have a team of practice squad guys, banged up on the offensive line as it is, lost Tyree Phillips over the course of the game, didn't have Ben Powers, although I thought Ben Cleveland did some nice things and might just see him starting moving forward. We know there are issues at tackle. We know that they were missing Sammy Watkins. Devin Duvernay came up a little gimpy on one of the second half returns. We saw Prochet replace him. So
Hollywood Brown was limp. It looked like he limped most through half the game at some point.
Yeah,
he was out of a couple of plays when he was out there because he felt like he couldn't run.
Well, how about the game he had? 10 catches, which sounds great, but he only had 43 yards. Goes back to what I said about Huntley. Just they weren't really pushing the ball down the field. So you look at that. You look at the secondary. I mean, my goodness. Of their 5 corners that were active going into the game, including their practice squad elevations, only two of them were even in the organization in early September. Anthony Averett and Tavon Young, who left with the concussion in the first
I
half.
was
So,
figuring out the Seymour
yeah,
guy, the 38. He was
yeah.
out there running around. I thought of James Trapp.
Right. I mean, and you have Robert Jackson who's wearing number 17. It's like, wait, I thought Le'Veon Bell wasn't that Le'Veon Bell? I
Mike
mean, it's so
Wallace? Yeah,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah. I mean, it's just absolutely remarkable. But you're looking at that. Could they have played for overtime? Was there justification that you could have said that? Sure, absolutely, especially when you're playing at home. But I do think that was a case, and John Harbaugh talked about it afterwards. I don't think that was nearly as much as an analytics decision as much as a gut decision. If you want to talk about it from an analytics standpoint, the analytics, Nestor, tell you that if you're down 14 in the fourth quarter, go for two, and you're thinking about wanting to try to win it in regulation, go for two on the first one. If you get it, guess what? You're down 6. You score that second touchdown, then you are trotting out the best kicker in NFL history to win the game. So if you're thinking in terms of trying to play to win in regulation, there's an argument to be made that you go for the 2 on that first touchdown. And then if you don't get it, you're still down 8 and you can try to go for 2 to send it to overtime. So I think if anything, that to me is a little more of an analytics minded. And that's something I didn't think that was the question for post game. I think that's the question for Monday in terms of, do you think of going for 2 on the first touchdown? If you're dead set on trying to win in regulation, which, you're talking about the Packers, you're trying to, one problem this team has had, and
Well, when
we've
you're
talked
losing by 2 touchdowns, you want to force overtime. Like that's the fan in you saying
yeah,
force overtime, but forcing an overtime where you're lopsided to begin with because you don't have the horse for the course, right?
right.
Like, and you've come 2 touchdowns back already to get into this miraculous position where here's the ball, we're going to blow the whistle, 2 yards, you get to win the game, which didn't feel even realistic. As Dennis Colatzos, and I'm wearing the Coons Ford shirt right now, was tweeting that people were heading to the exits because they were. Most of them weren't heading to the exits because they were Packers fans everywhere. I thought they were Dundalk High fans for a little while because they were wearing Kelly green and gold. But Luke, the analytics part of this, it is a conundrum, right? I saw the Buck Showalter got hired over the weekend, right? Like I'm not going to play analytics at all. 5 years later, a decade later, still getting gigs because the old school way does sort of work to some degree. That being said, this is pretty common sense that why you would go for it, right? Like why you would go for it. There's a lot of there's great evidence to say this was a good decision to go for it. Then there's the what kind of player are we going to call?
Yeah, I mean, there are always multiple variables involved. I mean, that's why we talked about it after the Pittsburgh game. John said we're out of corners, and what he didn't say was, yeah, Marlon Humphrey tore his pec and is probably done for the year. And did you see Ben Roethlisberger marching against us up and down the field in the fourth quarter anyway? Again, I think there was certainly an argument to be made one way or the other for that one. I think that was a little more of a toss-up, and I think even looking at some of the analytics people that I follow on Twitter, which, Football Outsiders, Edge Sports, some other analytics types, did bring up the thought of, again, if you're so dead set on wanting to win in regulation because extending the game and asking your defense to make additional stops against Aaron Rodgers, probably not a great proposition if you're being realistic about it. So if that's the case, again, you score the touchdown when you're down 14, you score the touchdown, so you're down 8. There's a thought to go for 2 right there, because if you get it, then the 2-pointer's out of the way in terms of trying to get a win, and you could set it up that if you score that second touchdown, then it's Justin Tucker kicking for the win. So, I think there are always different ways of looking at this, but again, it does come back to the play call. And this is the other factor that I think at this point, even though John, he was asked this in the post game, and he's not going to come out and say it because, again, it kind of throws your team under the bus. It potentially throws your offensive coordinator under the bus. It does factor in after a while that at some point you say, we're not very good at converting these right now. I mean, we're just not. At some point in time, you do have to look at the percentage. And all right, if you say overtime is theoretically, even though it's not, because there's always a better team, and the Packers would have been favored in overtime. but you had the coin flip, so that kind of makes it a little more of a 50-50 proposition. But
But just
if you,
throwing the ball,
yeah,
they had the
sure,
perfect play 2 weeks ago and threw the ball, Aaron. Just
yeah,
throwing the ball in that situation is dicey unto
can
itself,
be.
and putting yourself into a situation where that's your only option. I think Lamar had a read 2 weeks ago in the Pittsburgh game that TJ Watt sort of cut off that lane.
Yeah,
In this particular case, that wasn't the play here. The play was roll, 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 and it was kind of blown off from the beginning to some degree. I thought.
yeah, and I think this is also where we do need to take a step back and say, as well as Tyler Huntley has played, and he's looking like a legitimate quarterback. I mean, this is looking like a case where, and I don't even think I'm out of bounds here in saying this because the guy I'm going to mention didn't barely played here at all. This is looking like this could be a Tyrod Taylor situation where he could go somewhere in a couple years and be a starting
He's
quarterback
already
and be
played
really
better than
successful.
Tyrod played here.
Well, I mean, Tyrod barely played here. I mean, that was part.
But
Joe
but
was
but
durable, right?
but
Right.
fair enough. But I mean,
Sure.
I don't know that Tyrod would have played as well here, right?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Right, right. And keep in mind, I mean, Tyrod, he went to
This is a
Buffalo.
high bar. What
Sure.
Huntley's done's a high bar, I guess is what I'm saying.
It is. It is. And that's what's so impressive. But when you are in that situation at the end of the game, you do wonder if the rollout call is a way to limit his options because you don't want him trying to process too much there. And you're thinking, you know what? They haven't covered Mark Andrews the entire night. We're gonna try to get it to our best player, our best receiver in that spot. Now you go back and look, and as numerous people pointed out, was Marquise Brown open on the play? Yeah, but again, that's the difference with him being in that position compared to Lamar Jackson, compared to Aaron Rodgers being in that position. You have a much different experience level that you have to at least account for. Again, these
And you
coaches
have
make
to process in real time that
yeah,
makes
yeah,
Aaron Rodgers a Hall of Fame
right.
player after 18 years of doing this, right?
I mean, you just see what he does, his footwork, the way he buys time. I mean, he's not particularly fast anymore. He's got that fractured pinky toe and he's 38. I mean, he doesn't move around like he did when he was 28, but he just has such a way. And you saw what the Ravens did, with Devontae Adams, how many times they're bracketing him. They'd have a defensive backup, a closer press coverage, but they had someone, a safety lurking behind. And, but he finds someone else. Whatever the coverage is, he finds an answer for. I mean, the same way that Peyton Manning always did it. Tom Brady still does it. Patrick Mahomes, when he's playing his best, does it. I mean, it's really, it's uncanny. But I do think that might have factored in a little bit there. But I still would have liked a play that had a little more of a running element. Whether it's a QB draw, something along those lines. I mean, we saw the Ravens run quarterback power. I mean, they ran. One thing that was I thought interesting about that game, no Patrick Ricard yet. Nick Boyle was back. At times I thought he did some good things. He's still not moving great. You can see that. But you had him, you had Tomlinson, you had Andrews. I mean, they went with some heavy formations. They even passed out of some of those heavy packages. But, is there an argument? You need 2 yards. Do you just do what they did in Seattle a couple years back with Lamar on fourth down and, what was 4th and 2 and ended up being a 11-yard touchdown or whatever it was? Do you try to do something like that and just say, hey, we're going to try to beat you doing it this way? And, I mean, I think it's always easy to judge these decisions and these calls based on whether they work or not, right? I mean, it's just like you mentioned the first quarter.
It's just
You mentioned
the ball hitting the ground that is so.
Sure. I'll hear
Why'd
that.
you
Yeah.
do that? Well, you're throwing the ball down there in a situation where you're sort of built to run, kind of, sort of. I don't know. It leaves me, even if they're successful,
Yeah.
and they almost were. They came closer in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago to being. I mean, that was an errant throw. I mean, literally. I mean, just an errant throw. This was just a bad play. Yeah, I feel differently about this.
Yeah, and I think with that, I mean, you mentioned they're built to run, but they're kind of not really that right now in terms of it being optimal, right? I mean, we've kind of talked about what has their identity been,
Well, dude,
and
you can either run it or throw it. Those are your.
Yeah, exactly, right. So again, it didn't work. I think you and I are in agreement. I know a lot of people didn't love the play call. I mean, certainly, if you're going to throw, you want to try to make it Mark Andrews, but I would have really liked to see Tyler Huntley hold on to that ball and see if you can just block up 2 yards and and try to go home that way. But alas, it didn't work. Another close loss, and we will on to Cincinnati. There you go.
Well, the good news is you get free coffee at Royal Farms before the Cincinnati game, but you got to have the Royal Farms Rewards app when you do that. Christmas Day, coffee, and it says any size. So I hope you're thirsty like Justin Tucker. Make sure you get out the Rofo this week. I had a great debate with Max Weiss as well as Ron Cassie at Baltimore Magazine. Rofo Nation is featured on the cover. Apparently, my quote about how much I love Western fries hit the cutting room floor. They're anti-Western fry. I don't know what it is. It's fine. It's more for me. It's just more of that delicious coated fried deliciousness, that moist deliciousness that I love. So hats off to Royal Farms, all of our sponsors for rolling with us through the beginning of the year. We're going to be out and about in the early part of the year, but just taking a little bit of it easy here this week as we get ready for Cincinnati, as Earl Weaver would say, and then Pittsburgh and the Los Angeles Rams coming this way in early January as well. We're getting ready for all those games. I am Nestor. He is Luke. You can find him all week long out in Owings Mills. Get ready for the ho-ho-ho holiday here. I am Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore. We're going to continue our Ravens conversation in the aftermath of a tough loss to the Packers right after this on Baltimore Positive.